Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeremy DaCosta. I'm the manager at Kingston Transit. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It's so nice to see an almost full room here this evening for this very special event. Tonight's meeting, we have a very special guest who joins us from the University of Waterloo. Dr. Jeff Casello was here in Kingston 7 years ago. 7 years ago, we started down a road with a vision for creating a new Kingston Transit. And we held a session just like this one that Jeff led that really helped set the tone for where Kingston Transit needed to be. And so we're very happy to have Jeff back 7 years later to share with us what he sees as the good, the bad, and the ugly of what has happened with Kingston Transit and transit in the city of Kingston very recently. Jeff is an academic. He works in the field of transportation, both in his academic life and also in his professional capacity. And he's going to share with us this evening his experience from other projects he's worked on. And he's going to bring that experience and his knowledge to us in a conversation about Kingston Transit this evening. So with that, I'm hoping you'll join me in giving Jeff a warm Kingston Transit welcome.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, and thanks so much to all of you for being here and for inviting me. You know, when Jeremy called well, I'll just back up. When I first met Jeremy and his team 7 years ago or 8 years ago now, it's really exciting for me because, you know, I teach some of this transit planning. I've worked in some other cities. But I think the most important thing for me is when we get these kind of opportunities, you really get to go out and you see how transit makes people's lives better and makes people's cities better and makes cities function better. And I think that's really what's most important. I think there's lots of people in the room tonight who would have easy solutions to make transit work better for you, and we're eager to hear that. And I think that's what this 5-year program is, or this planning for the next 5-year horizon is really about. So we start tonight with some observations about where we were 7 or 8 years ago, where we're gotten to today, and then I think we'll look ahead at some of the opportunities that lie ahead of us for the next 5 years. And I think that's really where all of us come together and we have a conversation about what will make Kingston Transit a better public service for the city of Kingston. So, as I said, I came here in 2009, and we saw some things that weren't good, and I'm going to explain some of those things. And what I want to do is really take you through what I think happened in those 7 years between 2009 and today, and then we get to the important part of the conversation for tonight, what's coming next for the city of Kingston. So this is the outline of what I want to talk about. What about the growth? I think all of you have probably seen that buses are fuller, buses are more frequent, buses are more reliable. There's lots of good things happening in the service, and we've got some data that we want to share with you tonight to show you the evidence that what you're seeing is actually happening system-wide. And talk about why that's happened and how we can continue to have those things happen in the next 5 years. So that's the outline. Some of you will recognize the map there from 2009. And if you think about best practices for a transit system, what we try to do is we try to build a transit system that goes from the most important origins to the most important destinations as directly and as frequently as possible. That makes it really attractive for people to use. So if you're able to drive a car, or if you have a car at your discretion and you are thinking about using transit, transit should be competitive to make that trip relative to how you would make that trip by car. And so when we came in 2009, we began and we looked here and we said, suppose I live here and I want to get here. Am I really going to travel 15 minutes in the wrong direction to try and get to that location? Because this route had been designed from, I don't know, 1955 or something, and it had been a legacy route, and that route really wasn't working the way we wanted it to work anymore. And there was lots of evidence of those kinds of things where the transit service was indirect, it was slow. Some of the schedules hadn't been changed since about 1975. So when the drivers left the garage in the morning, by the time they got to the end of their route, they were already late because traffic had grown enough that they couldn't get to the end of the route on time. And so we weren't putting the system in a position to be particularly successful. The other thing that was true was Kingston Transit had a logo, and you saw it around some places, but you weren't really sure that there was a transit system in the city of Kingston. It didn't jump out at you. It didn't have a strong image. You didn't recognize that Kingston Transit serves certain corridors. And that's something I think that was really important for Kingston Transit to address and the city as a whole to address, to make people aware of the quality of the service and then to improve that quality of service. And so we looked at this kind of map and we said, what you were trying to do in this, and this is something that a lot of cities tried to do, is that you were trying to serve everyone with a little bit of service. And what that means is you have hourly service in most places throughout the city. And that hourly service doesn't really work for a lot of people. So you've got a little bit of service for lots of people, but that little bit of service isn't very good. And so the question we asked at the time was, could we make it so that there would be some corridors where there was dedicated service that was going to be much better in those corridors? And I think that's what evolved. The other thing that I like a lot in this picture is you can see the Kingston Transit signs, or maybe you can't, on either side of the routes, but that's the way the service was in many ways advertised. It was 15 centimeters, 6 inches by 6-inch signs stuck on other posts, on highway posts, and so you could drive by pretty easily without ever knowing that you were in a corridor that was served by transit. We were in the RioCan Center, and we were there, and there's a transit post stuck in a concrete block stuck between two buildings that if you didn't look really, really closely, you'd have no idea that the bus went to that area. It needed to change. So Jeremy didn't want me to talk too much about what wasn't so good, but I had to tell you the story. So if you compare it to what you had to what we would consider to be transportation planning best practices, when you think about what a city should be doing, is it should be thinking about how people move in that city as a comprehensive system. Can you walk? Can you use your bike? Can you use your car? And can you use transit? How do all of these four things combine? The other things that are important is if you use your car, you have to be able to park it someplace. And there are some cities in the world, like Detroit, that have built more parking spaces than there are people. And what's happened in downtown Detroit is you can park easily, but once you get there, there's nothing to do because all you can do is walk through the parking lots that are there. The picture on the left here shows the city of Little Rock, Arkansas, and every one of the red blocks is a surface parking lot. So nearly the entire city is covered in parking. Thankfully, this is not what Kingston looks like. Thankfully, in your downtown, in fact, I wanted to use a picture of Kingston downtown, but I couldn't find enough surface lots to make my point. So you're doing a very good job in terms of not having the same kinds of problems. In terms of cycling, the picture on the right is an interesting one. That's a Queens student who rode his bike from Victoria, BC, all the way to Queens before his first day of school. He arrived on campus a day before classes began, and he was able to cycle the whole way. So I think we have to think about transportation systems as a whole and how to integrate these things. And to be fair to Kingston Transit, 7 years ago, they weren't involved in bicycle design. They weren't involved in parking decisions. They weren't involved in roadway designs. And so those things were happening around them, and Kingston Transit was really trying to adjust to those things, and not successfully, again, to be perfectly honest. The other interesting question is around land uses. And if we want transit to be competitive in regions, we have to make sure that we build housing and other things so that people who live in certain areas have a chance to use transit. And so this is an example of a subdivision. This happens to be from Kingston, but it could be pretty well anywhere in the world. And the interesting thing about this is, suppose I live on this cul-de-sac right here. Well, the arterial where I could possibly get on transit is right there. But there's no way to get from my home here to the arterial there without walking all the way through here, out this way, nope, not there, out here, all the way this way, and then back around. So we build subdivisions that end up being completely pedestrian unfriendly. So if you live in these subdivisions, the possibility of using transit becomes really, really difficult. You can't get out of the subdivision, and you can't get into the subdivision as a pedestrian. And so then the folks who live in this, they say, well, we may wish to use transit, and then you're asking our operators to drive into that subdivision, and anybody who wants to go by that subdivision now gets 3 or 4 minutes added onto their trip while that bus wanders through the subdivision to try and pick up the people who live inside. So this was another case where Kingston Transit was being directly influenced by decisions that were being made in the city that they didn't have a chance to comment on. And now, as those things come through and those decisions are made, those end up on Kingston Transit's desk, and they can at least try to influence the way those subdivisions are built. And if you get in early enough, you can make the conversation so that right here there's a pedestrian connection to the corner of Princess Street. And so you can build a bus stop there, and the pedestrian access makes it actually possible for you to get onto transit. So these are the kinds of things that were happening around transit that really limited transit's ability to be successful, again, 7 or 8 years ago. One thing that Kingston Transit already had in place when we were here the very first time was very good partnerships. These are all institutions that Kingston Transit had already been working with. Queen's was, I think, the first university in Canada to have a university pass for its students. And so that happened, do you know when that started? Was it in the 70s?
73.
73, okay. So more than 40 years ago already, Queen's was a partner with the university. Where I teach at the University of Waterloo, we started the student pass about 2005. And it was a 3-year pilot project, and then they asked in 2008 if the students wanted to renew it. It was a referendum for the students, and it passed again with 97%. And the conversation went from in 2005 to, why do I have to pay this fee for transit, to in 2007 that they better not take my transit away because I've made living decisions and life decisions based on the presence of transit. And one of the really interesting things about university passes, and I think we've all had some frustration, I ride the bus myself, we've all had some frustration with getting on the bus and having 40 students with book bags that I don't know what's inside. I think it's their entire life that's inside the book bag. They're often bigger than the student carrying the book bag. But that's some frustration, but that revenue source and that demand actually allows us to increase the quantity of transit service that we are able to provide. So in Waterloo, when the student numbers started to grow, and I'm sure it's the same here when the Queens and St. Lawrence numbers started to grow, what happens is everyone benefits because the quantity of service, the frequency of service starts to increase as well. So it's important to realize that this is all, again, part of a holistic system, and these partners were really important. And we're going to talk a lot more about these partnerships. But I think when we were here 8 years ago, Queens was probably your biggest partner along with St. Lawrence, right, at the time. And I think those successes were already 40 years in place, and growing them was important. So what else has changed since 2009? Well, so what I've done is, so that's another trick of academics. We ask students to do work, and then when we get up in front of the room, we say what I've done, because, you know, we take credit for everything our students do. So what Adam and Veronica did for me today was we went through and we looked at how the supply of transit has changed. And the blue line that you see is Kingston Transit. The green line is my home service, Grand River Transit. The red line here is London Transit, so London, Ontario, and the gray line is Guelph Transit. So Guelph Transit is here. And what we did was we started at 2010 and said, suppose we had all of them equal in 2010, how much have they changed from 2010 to 2014, which was the last data point that we had available to us. And what you can see is that amongst these 4 systems, Kingston Transit has grown their service the most out of these 4 systems, and these are 4 very representative systems for Ontario. So today, well, today it's even more, but in 2014, Kingston Transit was providing 31 or 32% more service in terms of the number of hours the buses were out on the street than they were in 2010. So in that time period, from the time I first came to where we are today, the question was, are we providing enough service? The answer was not quite enough service. And so with great strategic thought, the Kingston Transit increased their service by nearly 32% over that time period. So you're seeing more buses out on the road. What else have you done? Well, you've given your system an image, and thank heavens you've done it, okay? Because now you can actually find Kingston Transit as you come through the city. And I think the most important thing, as all of you know, is the express buses. So here's an image of your express bus, but also even the marketing associated with this. So instead of having the 2-digit numbers, now you've got the 3-digit numbers. You may not even have noticed, but this is a different logo for the express buses than it is for Kingston Transit. And it's important that these buses have their own identity. When we built the iExpress in Waterloo, we put a big iExpress logo on the side of the bus, and people noticed it was a different service. The stops were further apart, just like with your express service. They were more frequent, just like with your express service. It was more attractive to riders than it was before. And these things are really very inexpensive, this little bit of marketing. No offense to Ying, who does all the hard work, but this is kind of low-hanging fruit in order to make the system more attractive to its users. You have to be able to first recognize it and recognize that it's a kind of specialized service. Again, same systems, blue Kitchener, red London, green Grand River, that's Waterloo, and gray is in Guelph. And so again, starting all of them equally in 2010, the biggest growth at 2014 was in Kingston Transit. So you've had 21% growth over that time period. Now remember, you put 32% more hours of service out, and you've got 21% growth in ridership. Now, that trend continues like this for 2015 and 2016. But I didn't have the comparative data, so I didn't want to show you Kingston Transit without the other systems on the same graph. But that's what the data suggests. You've added about 1 million rides, right? 3.5 million to 4.5 million in this time period from 2009 to 2016. 1 million more rides. That's 3,000 more boardings every single day on your system. And so you should be remarkably proud of the way that your system has evolved and remarkably proud about the way the system has improved. There's very few transit systems in the world that pay for their operating costs through their fares. Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore maybe. These are places that have density that are 1,000 times the density of Toronto. So these are places that are very different than this. A very normal recovery rate for a city the size of Kingston is around 30%. In Waterloo, we're about 33 or 35%. The rest is municipal contributions, whether it's from provincial gas tax, federal gas tax, whether it's from municipal property taxes. 30% is not an unusual number. Some systems are at 15%. Portland, Oregon, right? Everyone talks about Portland, Oregon. It's a very sustainable city. They've elected to run light rail transit from 6 in the morning till 1 a.m. So they run it for 19 hours out of the day at 15-minute service all day, higher in the peak. And if they have very low ridership overnight, they don't care. They only recover 22% of their operating costs because the city has made a choice to run transit so that they can become a transit-friendly service. In small cities, I mean, just to back up a little bit, in the city of Toronto, they recover 75 or 80% of their operating costs from transit fares. It used to be a little higher. It's been going down a little bit. But that's, in Toronto, transit plays a different role than it does in Kingston. And it's a different role than it does in very small towns. You know, if you're a town of 20,000 or something, then transit very much is a social service. You're kind of in between that range where transit is for everyday commuting and a social service. And I think you're starting to move to the place on the high end in terms of what we call choice riders, those who own a car, have the potential to own a car, maybe can drive, maybe don't want to drive, but you're really at the top end of attracting those kinds of riders to your system, which is unusual for a city of 100,000. Even with gas tax in Canada, the data suggests that auto users pay 70%, 75% of the true cost of automobile operation, whether that includes winter maintenance, overall maintenance, that includes the insurance costs. If we want to start thinking about how much we spend in terms of protecting our energy interests so we have gas to put in our car, that's a whole nother ballgame that we're not even into. And there's something else. When you are riding on transit, you're about 100 times less likely to have an accident than you are when you are in your private automobile. It's true, and that's not an insignificant public cost. When you're on public transport, you are producing about 100th of the emissions that you are when you are driving your own gasoline-powered car. And that influences our healthcare costs. So there's all these kinds of things that we don't think a lot about when we use transit, but there are, in economic terms, we call these positive externalities. Society benefits in a way that it's really hard to measure, but we know it's happening. Okay, a couple more points and then we can fully open up the conversation. This is high school ridership in the last 3 years or 4 years. And so Kingston Transit, for those of you who don't know, started a project back in 2012 where they gave grade 9 high school students transit passes. And then those same students moved into grade 10, so then they gave grade 9 and 10 and so on. And what I think is most interesting about this is the annual ridership, month-by-month ridership here. And so this is the first year, fairly modest numbers, 3,000 riders, and then we get here to about 12,000, and then we're up to 24,000, and then in the last year, with all 4 grades with the passes, we're actually over 45,000 trips. But I want to draw your attention to something that's really important. Watch what happens in the summer. So these are trips potentially to and from school, but the trips go from here, from about 12,000 to 8,000, and here from 28,000 to about 20,000. So what this says is high school students are using 20,000 trips per month in the summer months because they have the transit pass, okay? This is incredibly important for a couple of reasons. From the transit operator's side, you've got great demand, and so you continue to provide very good service, so all of us who use transit benefit because there is this excess demand. The other thing that's important is students, when they are acclimated to transit at 14, 15, 16, 17, all the way through university or college, all of a sudden they have a familiarity with transit, and all of the data suggests that 16 or 17 or 18-year-olds aren't running out and getting driver's license. The percentage of 18-year-olds who have driver's license hasn't been lower than it is today since 1947 or something. Students, 17-year-olds, don't want to drive. They want to be on their phones, they want to be texting. Believe me, I can tell you that I teach a first-year class, 515 17-year-olds. Try to get them to put their phones away. It's like, forget about it. So they want to be doing other things. They don't want to drive. And so the number of people, 17-year-olds who are getting driver's license has never been lower, and transit is giving them. But I think what's lost in this conversation is how much better off are 17-year-olds and their families when they're able to take the bus to work or take the bus to their friend's house. They're not needing to be chaperones. If moms and dads don't have to drive their children every place, household costs on transportation can go down by as much as 30% when these 15, 16, 17-year-olds become what we say independent travelers, right? They don't need to be chaperoned anymore. And if you have a son or daughter who's 16 and another who's 14, if they can travel together, all of a sudden you have all of this safety and security for kids to be able to travel around, get access to jobs, to recreation, to whatever kind of community organizations they want to do. This is a huge benefit. It's really hard to measure, and this is another one of those things where we say, well, we're subsidizing these high school kids, except we're not. We're giving them independence, and we're giving them chances to work and to be integrated in society, and that's the benefits I think we have to really keep track of. Very hard to measure, but it's certainly a benefit we're aware of. And one of the things that we're really interested in looking after is to say, well, a couple of things is, trying to understand on a week-over-week basis, especially in the summer months, what are students doing with this pass? Are they going to work? Are they going to recreation? So Jeremy and I have been talking about a little bit of doing some work to do some surveys, have students record for a couple of days, what did they do on transit? How did they travel? What was their destination? And being able to see that. The other really interesting thing is to say, 5 years from now, if you spent your teens as a transit rider and you stay in Kingston, you get married, get a job, do the adult things, right? I've stayed out of adulthood as an academic. I hang around with 17, 18, 19-year-olds all day long, so I stay young. That's my goal. My hair doesn't think that I'm young, but everybody else does. But when we see them at 22, 23, 24, are they still transit users, right? And that's a really interesting question. And I'm not interested in them being transit users because I think transit is good for society. I'm interested in them being transit users because they've opted to do that, and it's lower cost for them, and they're deriving a benefit from doing it, and so is society, right? That's what I think is really the most important thing. Okay, so what else has gone on? Well, there's new partnerships, and this morning I had a chance to talk with colleagues at Kingston General Hospital, and it was really exciting. It's really interesting there. They started out, and Ying went and some friends from Kingston General Hospital, they talked, how many employees do you think we could get to be part of an automatic transit pass program? 8, 10, 12, and they started and there was 8 or 10 or 12, and then they gobbled up a few more, and they said, well, if we get to 50, we can take a couple dollars more off of the transit pass rate, and they got to 50. And then they got to 92, and they said, well, 100 is another mark, and if we could get to 100, we'd take another couple dollars off the price, and they got to 100. And then in the blink of an eye, they got to 460. And the way they got to 460 was not Ying going up and down the hallways being intimidating, because that's what she likes to do. It was because people around the water cooler were saying, why should we drive in and pay for parking or walk 20 minutes from a free parking spot to get to Kingston General Hospital when the bus comes every 10 minutes reliably right in front of the building? And it was the quality of the service and the benefits. And so 460 people, and there is a technician who I met this morning, Stefan, who works at Kingston General Hospital, who should have Ying's job, really, because he's the biggest advocate and marketer for transit. Whenever anyone says, boy, parking's expensive downtown, they say, well, wait a minute, why would you park here when you can take transit? I mean, so it really has been an organic, bottom up. It's been people realizing that the benefits exist for them, and that's what's happened. This picture I took this morning, was it this morning or was it yesterday? Yesterday, and maybe I didn't take the picture either, but that's okay. This picture was taken yesterday, let me say that. And I think what you can see if you look closely is it's not just students, it's not just staff, it's nurses, doctors, it is the head of medical services at Kingston General Hospital is a customer, an everyday transit rider. And what Stefan said again this morning, he says, when you get on the bus, you're no longer the doctor and the technician, you're two guys on the bus having a conversation. And what's happening is, socially, this is becoming the norm, that people of all walks of life and culture and incomes and ages and ethnicities are on this bus together, and it's become very much accepted, not accepted, anticipated. People like it. It's fun to be on that with your neighbors. You get to know people. You have a chance to have conversations in a way that you never did before. And I think that if you look closely there, you're going to see people of all ages and ethnicities and incomes, and I think that's really exciting. The other thing that's interesting is that if you look at how transit ridership grows, if you have to think about whether or not you have a bus ticket or you can pay the fare every time you get on, then you're much less likely to use transit regularly. As soon as you have that pass in your pocket and you stop thinking about paying the fare every time, it's like people who have their parking paid for them at work. They never think about driving to work because it's free to park, right? They never think about the fact that maybe they're paying $30 or $40 or $100 a month out of their paycheck because they don't see it. And it's the same thing as soon as you buy that buy that transit pass, when you get on the bus, it's zero cost to you, right? You don't think about it. You don't think about whether or not you have the money with you, whether or not you have a ticket. Once you buy that adult pass or that pass, you're much more likely to become a customer. And what we've seen is, the numbers are there, that we went from, in the last 7 years, from about 1,700 adult passes in September of each year to about 2,800 adult passes in September of every year. So nearly doubling the number of adult passes that Kingston Transit sells in 6 years. And again, from the transit agency perspective, is what that means is they've got an additional 1,100 passes that at full prices are $70, right? So you're looking at another $70,000 worth of revenue to Kingston Transit that they know they're going to get every month, which allows them to plan ahead and give you better service. And so that's why the transit pass sales are so important to a transit agency. And so these are numbers, I think, that are really important. Let's talk about parking. I don't know. I think I have a supportive group in the room. Adam's going to stand up and defend me if things turn ugly. So I could tell you that Kingston is one of the very few cities of your size that makes the correct, and I'll say that, makes the correct decision to charge you for parking in the downtown core. And I'll tell you why I think that. There's two reasons why I think that's important. This is incredibly valuable land that we have in our downtown core. If you have a surface parking lot, the value of that land, if you were to develop it, is astronomical. And it's not just valuable to the owner of that land, but it's also valuable to the city, because the property taxes that could be generated from that parcel are really, really high. And so the idea that we have free parking is just not true. A colleague of mine, Donald Shoup, wrote a book, said there's no such thing as free parking. And he goes through and he shows all the costs to society for parking. And so what you're doing with parking in Kingston is really very progressive. Now, I know there are a lot of unhappy people that they have to pay to park in a city of this size. But I think what you're really doing is you're saying, we have this resource. It's a scarce resource. It's our land in our downtown area. If we use it for parking, we have a really good chance to end up moving towards a place where we have so much parking that we have very few amenities and very few reasons to be downtown. And so I applaud Kingston for what they've done in terms of parking, and I think it's very sensible. If you're a resident in the downtown area, do you want it so that you can't get in and out of your driveway because you've got hundreds of Kingston General Hospital folks trying to park in your neighborhood for free? Is that a situation you want? And I think the answer is no. I mean, I think if you live in the West End and 1,000 Kingston General Hospital residents came and decided to go park on your street, you might ask what's going on here, right? But the opposite is exactly what's going on. So I think your parking policy is really progressive. You're ahead of the curve. In Kitchener-Waterloo, we're spending, as I said, $818 million on a light rail transit project. I can park for 8 hours for free in Uptown Waterloo. In my mind, that's completely nonsensical, because this is incredibly valuable land. It's only going to become more valuable when you have lots of transit riders going by it. And so why would you allocate this to store a car? And environmentally, parking lots are dreadful. They're absolutely dreadful. The water that runs off parking lots is amongst the most hideous, lowest water quality you could possibly imagine. So the most important thing in all of these cases is that you give people an alternative. You can't go and you can't introduce $100 a month parking around your workplace if there's no other way for you to get there, right? It's simply not possible. So my advice to you would be to look at places where there is really high concentrations of employment, and then if you wish to price parking for those places, then make sure you implement very good alternatives, transit service, bikes, walking alternatives before, at the public expense, and then you are able to impose parking charges, and you have to give people an opportunity to be educated, right, about that, and say, a year from now the parking charges are coming. 6 months from now, I'm telling you the parking charges are coming. 3 months from now the parking charges are coming, and when the parking charges are coming, your counselors can get phone calls and say, well, we didn't have any idea that the parking charges were coming, and then you can say, well, you weren't listening because we told you over and over again. And by the way, we've introduced 2 new bus services that'll drop you off right in front of the building, so you don't really need to park, right? And I think the other thing is, and we've talked a lot about this in the last couple of days, is we all get very accustomed to our routine. You wake up in the morning, you're trying to get the kids to school, you're trying to get out of the house, and you don't want to think that morning, like, how am I going to get to work today? You tend to do what you did yesterday because it works. And then what we need to do from time to time is, if what everyone is doing isn't good for them and isn't good for society, we have to give them a little ping. We have to say, hey, maybe you should think a little bit differently about what you're doing. And parking charges often, even if they're a couple bucks a day, are just enough to say to someone, maybe you should behave a little bit differently. Like, I have a parking spot that the university, well, I pay, I don't know, $35 a month for parking at the university. It's empty 95% of the time. Why do I have it? Well, because there are 2 or 3 or 4 days a month where I go, and now sensibly I should stop paying for that parking spot, right? But then it means the 2 or 3 or 4 days that I go, then I'm going to have to carry the $4 with me, which is the daily fee, right? So there's a little bit of convenience associated. But if they charge me every day, even if they gave me the extra $35, then made me put the $35 in the machine every day, I'd probably get rid of that parking spot, just because it would give me the signal that I don't really want to be paying for that parking every day. So every now and then we just have to ping people to get them to change their behavior a little bit. Okay, so what comes next? Well, there are, I think, whenever you make the kind of massive changes that you've made here, there's lots of small changes on the margin that you can make to improve things. I think there are quarters where you're at 15 minutes now, you're going to 10 in the next 3-4 months, and that's going to make an important difference. So I think there are certain places, I was talking with the operators earlier, there's places where they're coming out of terminals, out of stations, and they come to a red light, and if they miss the cycle, it can be 2.5 minutes for them to turn out of that place, because it goes all the way through the cycle. And so this is an opportunity with a little bit of technology and a little bit of will with the engineering group, that you could change that 2.5 minute delay at these places to be 40-second delay, or 30 seconds delay, or no delay, because you can extend the green time. This technology, it's called transit signal priority, and basically what happens is the bus communicates with the traffic signal and says, I'm a bus full of 46 people, I should really get ahead of the 20 cars that might go in the time that they have. And that kind of technology in certain places can have huge impacts on the reliability of your system. And so that technology, I think, is something that you should investigate in certain corridors, that it could have a huge impact on the quality of your service. When I say up there, eliminate the schedule, I think there are places in Kingston now where you don't have to check the schedule. You just know that the bus is coming within 10 minutes, and that's enormously convenient. It's the same way that the pass takes away the stigma or the time delay of trying to figure out, am I going to pay for it? Not having to check the schedule means I just walk out, and I'm sure I'm going to be, when the shelter is empty, you know you've got a 6-minute wait. When the shelter is full, you know you've got a 30 seconds wait, right? And that's how we're getting to that point in some quarters where that doesn't mean you can't still improve, you can't find places where there are marginal benefits. But I think when I came 7 or 8 years ago, you had no network structure. Now you've got a network structure. Your express routes create the base of your network. They work very well. The changes there are on the margins. Speed up a little bit here, eliminate a stop here, whatever it is, or add a new stop here, whatever that is. Small changes on your core network. For me, the most important thing that you need to think about is, what does your network look like next? And if you look at the core network, so these are your express routes, now you've got areas that you've got to infill. And your old conventional routes are trying to bring people from here, in many cases, still to here. But why do we do that? It doesn't make a lot of sense when we can use these conventional service, the traditional service, for example, to go here, and then we use this to take residents from here to feed to this express or to feed to this express. And if the express routes are on 15-minute service or 12-minute service, then it's very easy for the conventional buses to drop you off and you've got a 2 or 3 minute transfer. So I think the next most important thing that you have to do is think about what your conventional routes are doing and how are they feeding into your network that you've built, that you've been so successful with. I think that's incredibly important, and I think those are the changes. You've got, I haven't looked closely at your conventional routes, what remains, but I would suspect that you've got some places where you can do much better. You've got some inefficiencies there. And I think that that's what comes next for you, is to look on a route-by-route basis on how you can make these things work. The other thing is that there's a limit, right, to what the express network does. And so these circles here are intended to be places where you can pick up. And I'm not sure what the service looks like here, and what it can look like. You're not going to generate 1,000 trips per hour of the north of the 401. I think that the important thing from a transit perspective is when you start thinking about transit systems, you have to think about first creating a network that moves really well and works effectively for your highest density areas. And then you think about, at the same time, you think about how do you make sure that as many people as you can get connected to the very high quality service. That's the kind of the best practices in transit design. Now, from a city's perspective, and I'm going to just speak honestly, there's councillors in the room, so I'll just say this honestly. We have to understand that bringing service to the less dense rural areas north of the 401 is going to cost money, and it's going to cost more money than providing service in the city because you're going to get fewer riders for the same level of service. And so the city as a whole has to evaluate where they're going to get the best social impact, the best environmental impact, the best transit impact on these kinds of things. And so there's always trade-offs and priorities, but I agree that some base level of service should be what was expected. Now, I don't think you can expect to get 10-minute service from 6 to 2 a.m. You're not going to get that, but I do think hourly service, that it's on a smaller, even to start 2-hour service, smaller vehicles, something that brings you to connect so that people have mobility options. It's going to cost. It's part of the next 5-year horizon to decide how you can make that work and do it in a way that is economically viable. The one thing that I wanted to tell you about that's coming is this technology. And what Kingston Transit is going to have in the next 2 years is a system that tells you where every bus in the network is. Well, it tells Jeremy where every bus in the network is. So at home on your computer, at the library on the computer, anywhere you have access to a computer, on your phone, there's free apps where you can look to see that the next bus is coming in 7 minutes. And so you are thinking about leaving, you know the bus is coming in 7 minutes or in 22 minutes. You think, can I finish this in 7 minutes? No, okay, then I'm going to plan the 22-minute bus. And if I've got 15 minutes, then I can go grab a coffee or I can grab that gallon of milk. What this has shown, around the world these systems have been implemented, and people feel like the wait time is much shorter when you can actually watch the countdown. When you get to the bus stop and you have no idea when the bus is coming, it's incredibly frustrating. Do I have time to do something? Do I not? Am I going to stand out here in the cold for 20 minutes? How long is it going to be? But when the sign there tells you it's going to be 4 minutes, this is going to be astronomically valuable to you. I can trust me. When these came to Waterloo, it was like heaven. I mean, people were praising these real-time displays. So this is coming in the next 2 years, and so this is really important. I spent a lot of time in a city in Germany called Karlsruhe. It's on the border with France. It's a city about the size of Kingston. It has 350 kilometers of rail transit, of streetcars and tramways. The mode share there is 25% by walking, 25% by cycling, 25% by transit, and 25% by private auto. I would suspect that your mode share here is about 93 or 94% by car and 7% in the remainder. And what's changed? Well, one battle that we're facing here is that from 1945-ish to 2005, we emphasized one mode to the detriment of all other modes. And so we're fighting an uphill battle. That being said, I think the evidence that you've seen has shown that new service, good service, competitive service helps. An economic signal that says that your other choices, your auto travel, is not really free. There's actually costs that are associated with it, helps. When transit becomes mainstream is when transit is as competitive for most trips as other modes. And so if I walk out of my house, I can walk to my office in 25 minutes, I can drive in 15 minutes, I can take transit in 15 minutes, or really the fastest for me is biking, and I can be there in 10 minutes. But when we get that balance between the trips, for most of the trips in the region, we get there. But the one thing that is actually maybe the most important is when you know that the people who are using transit are like you. They're your neighbors. They share an ethnicity, they share an age, they share an income level, they share a profession. When that starts to happen, when transit is no longer a stigma, but really you see your neighbor from next door walking to the bus stop, and that becomes a motivating force for you, there's lots of evidence in academic research that says even if transit is twice as expensive as using your car, if your neighbors do it, you feel a little more pressure to use transit. So getting to this point where it's a societal norm is really important. And so the way you do that is you incent transit, and you, to be perfectly honest, you disincent the other modes. And so parking, besides being a revenue generator and a real use of resources, an appropriate pricing of resources, it's just enough of a signal to start to change behavior. So you're on the right path. I would say that honestly. I think what mainstream transit means in Kingston is a little bit different than what mainstream transit's going to mean in Toronto and other large cities. But if you got to the point where your aspirational visions are 15% of the mode share, I think that's good. But I think you should look at a coordinate here. You should look at this area, and you should say, for trips going to here, coming across this line, you should be looking for 25 or 30% of trips coming into that area, because this would work. And it doesn't matter where people are coming from, but if that's their destination. So set big goals and work towards them. Your trajectory is in the right direction. There are very few cities in the world that have completely free transit. I'll give you an example of one city where it works in a slightly interesting, well, in an interesting way. In the city of Boston, they have a light rail system. They're Green Line trains. And so they form almost the same kind of network that you've built, a series of lines coming from the suburbs that come into downtown. And if you board on an inbound train, so you're coming from the suburbs into the city center, you pay your fare there. And then if you are going outbound, if you board underground, you still pay a fare. But if you board above ground on an outbound train, it's free. You just get on and you go back out of town. And so they do that for lots of reasons, because it speeds up the boarding. Everybody gets on without having to show a fare. Madison, Wisconsin had a city center that was completely free also. So any train that brought you into the city center or brought you out of the city center was free as well. Citywide free transit, I actually don't think it's a very good idea, and I'll tell you why. When something becomes free, people tend to value it much less than it's actually valued. And so paying something, now getting the price right is really important, as we've heard lots of times tonight, but paying something gives the impression that this is a valuable city service that people are deriving a value from. And I think that there are certainly lots of people who want to use the system who are economically able to pay for the system. And asking them not to seems like a bad idea from a revenue perspective. What you're doing then is you're asking people to subsidize people who live in a certain area, who are maybe not economically able to pay, but then they're subsidizing those who can pay. And that's where my concern starts to go. So I think, and I'll just make one more last point, is that a lot of the evidence suggests that the out-of-pocket expenses, and I know that's not the experience for many of the people in the room, but the out-of-pocket expenses for transit is not the biggest deterrent to using transit. It's the frequency of the service, the quality of the service, the reliability of the service. Those things are actually much more important for what we would call choice riders, those who are economically able to afford other systems, other modes, but they choose to use transit. So I'm generally, I don't support the idea of ubiquitous free transit. I think if you were to board, for example, in the Princess Street corridor, particularly maybe on weekends, that should be free. Okay, I see that because it's an economic development tool, and you bring people downtown on the weekends to support local businesses, right? Or if you're going to certain destinations, you're going to Kingston General Hospital, maybe that trip is free because you are not an employee of the hospital, but you need the hospital. That's a free trip, right? So there are certain areas where you can customize the service.
I'd like to thank Dr. Casello and his students for joining us here this evening. And it's a wonderful partnership that we have with them. It is certainly not a consulting relationship at all. It is a partnership we have with him and his team. And it's wonderful to have had them here 7 years ago. It's wonderful to have had their guidance and the ability to touch base with them over our journey. And it's great to have them here this evening as we talk about what next looks like. There have been many, many ideas and thoughts and concepts shared here this evening. They've all been captured. And I'm looking forward to replaying this again at some point in the future. So again, just a reminder, there are 3 additional public sessions, online survey, there's an online chat. We would love to engage with you further and to look forward to those opportunities. With that, we'll close the evening, and good night, and transit is available. Very close by, just across the way, and we hope you're all going to, we'll hope to see you on the bus. Thanks.